your master, Padawan? Someone I killed, perhaps?
No paradise is without its shadows. If we cannot accept this truth and learn from our pain, then our plight shall be repeated.
To start off, I personally believe video games are art, and because of a poll I made a few weeks ago, most of you watching do as well. But there are a lot of people who don't necessarily agree, like George R.R. Martin and Robert Ebert. But this video isn't about them, considering Martin worked with From Software to develop the world of Elden Ring, and Ebert softened his views on the topic before his death in 2013. But even as I'm writing this video in 2022, if you do some research about this topic, you'll see articles, 800+ word Reddit posts, and everything else between claiming that video games can't be art for one reason or another. So I went through all of these posts to find the common threads that stops people from calling games art. So in this video, I'll create a definition of art and see if video games meet the definition. So let's get started. After reading way too many sources, the definition of art for this video is the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual, audio, or physical form, producing works such as painting, sculpture, music, movies, shows, plays, etc., to be appreciated primarily for their beauty, emotional power, or the experience intended by the creator or creators. This definition comes mainly from the counterpoints in the various articles I read for this video. However, the thing I found hypocritical in everything I read is that a lot of these people would argue that players have a choice about how they interact with the world of the video game. Therefore, the creators of said video game's message or meaning might get lost in that choice, and that if developers were to take away so much choice, that the game would become a walking simulator and it wouldn't be a game anymore. I agree that there are games like That Dragon Cancer and The Vanishing of Ethan Carter that sit on the borderline between interactive experiences and video games. But this is where a contradiction in their train of thought appears when they compare experiencing versus interacting, because most of these articles define experiencing art with very concrete guidelines. For example, looking at a painting, listening to music, attending a play, and many other activities. However, what happens when people aren't interacting with these things as the creators intended? What's the difference between seeing a picture of a painting in 4K versus real life? What happens when you listen to a new album while doing chores around the house versus solely focusing on it? And what happens when watching a play through a recording versus going to the theater to see it? The simple answer is that people are still experiencing the art as the creator intended, but the message and meaning that they get from that art is going to be different because of how they interacted with that art, which sounds very similar to video games. So it seems like the core of people's issues with video games being considered art is how much control an individual can have over their own experience. However, if a creator makes a piece of art with the intention of people experiencing it differently, that argument falls apart. This leads the people who created these articles and those that agree with them to have no choice but to admit video games are art. Now that I've explained the argument can't hold up against the examples I just gave you, it leads me to our next point, which is that games are created with the intention of appealing to people, and by trying to appeal to a certain demographic or to as many people as possible inherently stops games from being a proper art form, because the artistry and message of the creators should be first and foremost, as opposed to what big corporations backing these projects wants to do. As noted in the article named Video Games Are Not an Art Form by Darren Allen, which is linked down below. However, they skim over a few mediums that are very similar to the AAA video game market, like blockbuster movies from big studios and albums from traditional labels, who have historically always tried to and succeeded in interfering with the works of the creatives that make their products. Some infamous examples of this are the classic film Blade Runner going through several cuts between its original theatrical release in 1982 up to its final cut in 2007 due to the studio botching the original release, leaving audiences confused for almost 2 decades. Or I could look to the music industry with artists that have issues with Sony's music label like Michael Jackson and Mariah Carey, to name a few. So to act like the film industry doesn't do test screenings to see what audiences like, and labels don't have entire departments dedicated to finding out what sound is popular at the moment is ridiculous. Obviously, you shouldn't let outside opinions or what is popular dictate what you're making, and I agree with that to an extent, but that being said, no one creates art for themselves, because art cannot be considered art unless it is presented to the masses, and that may be a controversial statement, so let me explain. Do people write screenplays for movies they don't want to make? Do people compose music for it not to be played? And even using myself as an example, do YouTubers post videos for no one to watch them? The answer to all of these questions is no. Art cannot be considered art based solely on the creator's opinions, regardless if it is paintings, music, movies, and yes, even video games can only be considered art when exposed to the public and leading figures within those communities. And then those two groups share an acceptance of that piece of work, whether it pushes the medium forward in some way, stands as an outstanding example of what the medium can do, or becomes a classic within its own genre, like the Dragon Ball franchise did within the anime and manga industry. So to hold video games to this stringent standard is ridiculous, because the only way to have this opinion is to twist the definition of art, which will eventually lead to contradictions, as I've pointed out in this video. So with that being said, what the creator wants to present to the public should be first and foremost before anything else. But if the creator and other collaborators make concessions in how the idea is presented for initial or long-term monetary gains, shouldn't discount their work as art. This leads me to the most straightforward point, which is that there are no good arguments against games. When we think about video games as a medium, it combines art, music, directed visuals, writing, and so many other things that are considered art forms without a second thought. And to have a person or team of people put these things together in a coherent experience is amazing within itself. Like a director for a movie, a conductor for an orchestra, or a choreographer for a dance performance, it takes a certain level of dedication, skill, and hard work to deliver a product in your chosen medium that is worthy of being called art. And I want to make it very clear, I don't believe that every game is art. That would be a stupid statement to make. But the deeper you dive into this topic, the conclusion becomes undeniable that video games are art. And anyone who denies that doesn't know what art is. So with that being said, like, comment, subscribe, and support my Patreon if you enjoy my content. Also, if you want to see another video essay, that's on screen right now.